God bless you.
To witam w takim
So,
razie na
welcome
kursie
to this course featuring the icon of Our Lady of Fatima.
Matki Bożej Fatimskiej.
What I'd like to
To, co
say
bym
at the
chciał,
very beginning is that I hope you'll find
powiedzieć
time,
na sam
above all,
początek, to
for
mam
building a
nadzieję,
relationship
że-
with Our Lady.
Że znajdziecie czas przede wszystkim na relację najpierw z Matką Bożą.
For reading about what Fatima is really about, for understanding why this icon was created, and why in this particular way. Because it's really important that before you start working on any image, you at least learn the basic things, which are truly needed to be able to establish a real connection.
Rzeczy, które są bardzo potrzebne w tej kwestii, żeby po prostu też nawiązywać relacje.
Now we're moving on to specifics, meaning we'll start looking for the drawing. For now, let's analyze a bit. We won't be painting just yet. I've decided that the course will go in two directions. It will be divided into two paths.
Kurs szedł dwutorowo, to znaczy się na dwie strony. Jedna strona będzie
One path will be a series of videos on painting a traditional icon, so we'll go through the full gilding process, etc.
A druga strona filmu chciałbym, aby była taka, że będziemy...
And the second path will be focused on a more contemporary interpretation. A modern approach, so to speak. So let's move on to how. The drawing is constructed and how to create your own version. I strongly encourage you to make your own drawing, even if it's just a simple copy, which I'll show you shortly. I already show this in the course about Saint Joseph as well. But I encourage you to learn this, because our body, our eyes, remember certain things. And later it will truly be much easier for you to interpret certain elements. And it will honestly help you a lot in the long run. Here we have an image. This is an icon from Donetsk, painted by a Polish iconographer, a woman iconographer, actually. She created this work. It's quite well constructed in terms of proportions. I've checked it myself. How to check it, how to analyze it, and how to make a copy that we can then transfer to the board, this is what we'll need. It's important to remember that we're not making a sketch, we're making lines. There's a difference between a sketch and lines. Let me explain. A sketch includes shading. Lines are just that, lines. That will guide us later in the process. So how will this look? We'll divide the icon. This is one of the methods of transferring, enlarging, or reducing. Just like in vocational schools, where they teach this on what's called graph paper. You practice enlarging or reducing keys or other technical shapes. Likewise, here we can adapt a printed or found image and transfer it to a board. We can adjust it to fit the size of our own wooden panel. How do we do that? First, we check if the proportions are correct, but usually they are. This here is the nose, and this is the proportionate size of the face. The nose is the reference point. It usually determines the correct size of proportions. Here it's exactly 2 centimeters. No, not 2, but 1 centimeter and 3 millimeters. And you'll see the nose fits exactly in the same grid square as the halo. It's actually a very useful measurement. The halo above the head should occupy about the same height as the nose. Notice, it fits in the same square. Of course, you need to keep in mind the tilt of the face, which I marked with a red line. I'll try to zoom in and show you this angle better. This is the vertical center line of the icon. We have the same number of squares on each side of this line. Now, based on the size of the nose, we create a grid of squares. Perfectly equal squares. So, for example, if the nose is 1 centimeter, then the squares are 1 centimeter each. We start drawing those squares from this level, where we marked the first square on the halo. So we define this square here and start measuring downward from there. Upward as well, if needed later. We shift the grid from the center outwards. We don't measure from the edge, because that way we'll lose the center point.
Kratki odmierzamy
So we first
od
find the
środka w
center.
bok. Tak, nie mierzymy tutaj od tej strony, bo nam nie wyjdzie potem to. Jakby nie znajdzie się środek. Szukamy środka. I teraz obliczamy
Then we
ilość
calculate
kratek,
how many
które nam
squares we
powstały.
have. And we divide
Tą
the
samą
dimensions of
ilość-
our
na tą
panel
samą
into that
ilość
same
kratek
number of
dzielimy
squares.
wymiar naszej deski.
This can
Może
vary
być,
depending on your board, because,
zróżnicowana,
attention, the height might
forma,
match,
dlatego że uwaga,
but not the width.
będzie nam się zgadzała wysokość deski, ale niekoniecznie szerokość, ponieważ jeżeli ja tutaj przełożę to na deskę, która będzie miała 30 cm.
For example, if I transfer the drawing to a board that's 30 centimeters tall and 25 centimeters wide, the proportions won't match, the width will be stretched. So we only account for the vertical layout, the height.
Formę, tak, od góry.
From the top, we measure, say, 5 millimeters from the edge of the board. And then we build our grid downward. We only add the extra horizontal squares afterward.
Dopiero potem
In the end, this will create an enlarged podlinnik template.
Ostatecznie to będzie wyglądało tak, że powstanie nam powiększony podlinnik.
Because of the grid, we'll be able to transfer all the dimensions freely.
Możemy swobodnie przenosić wymiary.
How big each part should be, for example, the hands might be 2 squares wide, the head 3 squares high, but we also have to keep in mind the tilt. So that angle has to be preserved to make everything come together correctly. Just to keep it brief, you'll see that I've also drawn a central line. I went about it a bit differently here because I didn't have that middle square. I divided that central square in half, but it doesn't really matter. Whether the squares fall exactly like this or not, someone more advanced will manage just fine. I made a little mistake, and that's how it turned out, but the center is still here. This line goes right through the center of the board vertically. So this is the middle of the board when it comes to vertical alignment. We then transfer the podlinnik, the base drawing template. And I really encourage you to make your own podlinniks. You'll have a ready-made one available on the website, without the grid. It's there for you, but honestly, try to create your own version. It's a really important exercise. Try to draw the lines yourself, it's very valuable. It helps you train your hand to remember where the garments fold, and to reflect on that. Sometimes we grab an example from the internet, and it turns out that it's done incorrectly. For example, the garment folds illogically, and then you run into problems, because there's no reference point. But when you analyze what's going on with the fold of a garment, how it's bent and flowing, it becomes very helpful. So it's essential to really analyze the forms. And that kind of analysis happens automatically when you create your own podlinnik, or transfer one by hand. That way, you memorize how the garment is shaped. And that's incredibly important. Don't skip this part of the process. I know that many schools teach using a copy and trace method. You drop the image into Word, set the dimensions, print it, pierce it, and trace it. This is not traditional tracing. It's actually copying with distortion caused by the lens, because the camera lens, as you'll see on printed images, if you draw straight lines, it bends them slightly. The surface warps, and that creates problems. But this way, we transfer the image ourselves and end up with a very accurate podlinnik. I've also noticed that many people follow videos online from experienced artists who demonstrate how you can fit figures here and there. That's already an advanced stage. The stage of designing your own icon layout. And at that point, you really need to learn. There are different methods. I'll briefly mention one here. You can base it on 3 circles. Take a look, here we have 3 circles. And modern iconography, as I've said before, sometimes wraps the entire garment within a circular shape. That's the first circle. The second circle frames the face, but it's much easier to transfer this when the face is frontal. Here the face is turned, so there's a slight distortion. You would have to adjust and shrink the circles here accordingly. You can test it or alternatively base your layout on the Christian cross. This is important because the form of the Christian cross differs from, for example, the Roman Catholic cross, or the Orthodox cross, or even the Greek cross. Each of these has different proportions for the crossbeams and their placement. In this case, it's a Christian cross, meaning the upper part is equivalent to two of the lower parts, and the arms are the same size as the top part. So in this case, we can fit the shape of a cross into it. We can even use triangles. Triangles are very pleasing to the eye, they're aesthetically appealing. This kind of planning is useful when designing your own icon, when you're developing your own drawing. It's a more advanced stage, and I don't want to introduce that yet in this course. But I think in the future we'll get into icon planning for sure. Still, I encourage you to copy icons, meaning, make many copies first, especially using this transfer technique, so that later you'll be ready to create your own drawings. Then you can make your own composition. The next step will be to transfer the image to a panel. We'll learn how to match the drawing to the size of our board so that we can transfer it directly and precisely.
Sprawy, jak dostosować to do deski, nie? Żebyśmy od razu sobie przenieśli rysunek, który potem będziemy mogli przenieść na naszą deskę. Ja mam deskę o wymiarze 30 na 20.
For example, I have a panel that is 30 by 25 centimeters, and it doesn't really match the proportions of the original drawing.
Oryginalnie ten rysunek. I zobaczcie, co zrobiłem. Znalazłem środek ikony. Nie, tutaj jest środek deski.
That's a problem. The panel is, let's say, not suitable for the original icon dimensions. So, what did I do? I found the center of the icon, and here's the center of the board. Watch what I did. We have the podlinnik, and from that point I started drawing the grid. I took the border into account so that the halo wouldn't bleed into the edge of the panel. That gave me this little section of grid to start with, and from there I began counting out as many squares as needed to transfer the image properly. I enlarged the drawing and I'm not worried at all about the empty space left on the sides. That space will soon disappear, because this icon, as you've noticed, has a specific feature, an additional painted border. In the example image, this border is a bit crooked because of lens distortion. But I took this into account.
Ale ja sobie uwzględniłem ramkę, że
I planned that the icon would have a 2 cm frame. And now, an important note, where do we apply that 2 cm frame? We don't include it at the top when drawing the podlinnik, because as you've seen, the border actually cuts into the halo. It curves inward, right around this area. It's actually a very attractive design. So we don't factor in the frame at the top when sketching, but we do account for it at the bottom. I'm going to flip this upside down to show you more clearly. I've planned a 2 cm bottom margin, so I measured and marked 2 cm here. In this way, I only accounted for the bottom frame. I'm not concerned about the sides, because the icon will be centered. So if I mark off a 2 cm margin here, it will fit. The side space will be sufficient. If we add 2 cm on both the left and right, it will work out. What's important is that the icon itself ends 2 cm before the board edge. I hope that made sense, more or less. Just to quickly repeat, we're working with the drawing including the halo, not the border, with the halo shifted downward to allow room for that decorative finishing border on the panel. So we make the transfer without worrying about that 2 cm top margin. But we must make sure that we preserve a full 2 cm bottom margin on the panel. Don't worry about the sides either, and place the podlinnik right in the center of the panel.
Musimy uwzględnić tą ramkę już 2-centymetrową, która będzie. Boki również się nie przejmujemy i podlinnik.
So if the width is, say, 25 centimeters, half is 12.5. Advanced math. And this way everything is centered properly. Prepare your drawing according to your board dimensions. I don't know what size you have. But if it's 30 by 25, this is the method to follow. If it's 25 by 20 instead, you'll need to adjust your drawing accordingly as well.
25 na 20, to też trzeba sobie ten rysunek w ten sposób przygotować. Błagam was, nie róbcie tego na drukowcu.
Please, I'm begging you, don't do this on a printer.
To jest już naprawdę
That's just. Give a little bit of your heart to Mary, and try to truly study the image, her image. Dear friends, creating something like this takes time, especially if we quiet down all the outside noise.
Takie dźwiękodajki i tam jakieś różańce dodatkowe i coś tam. Możemy sobie puścić jakąś ewentualnie...
Maybe some background rosary prayers, or even the Jesus prayer if you like. And in this kind of silence, while working, you can really have a deep conversation with Mary. And I think that's what this process of icon writing is truly about. You can open up, say something like, "You have beautiful eyes, I want to paint them well." But you can also say, "I'm struggling today, I'm scared, I have fears, but I still want to paint you." I'm a bit afraid of this whole coronavirus thing, and of so many things in life. This is how a real relationship can begin. We're painting Mary. Not just some lady from a photo. We're forming a connection, and that's the most important part of painting this icon. That it's not just mechanical painting for the sake of painting, or to earn money by selling it for a good price. If it turns out really well, then of course, you can sell it. But I believe iconography is really about building a relationship. When you paint a figure, try to engage in conversation. Alright, the video is already 17 minutes, that's long enough. We prepare the drawing, and the next phase, transferring the drawing onto the board. Do you enjoy this type of icon painting video workshop? Please remember, I'm sharing over 20 years of experience with you. I don't have to do this for free, and I don't have to teach, because I know how to do it myself and I can just work. It would mean a lot if you could confirm that this effort of recording videos is useful to you, with a donation to the foundation, so I can continue producing more. The time I spend making this workshop could otherwise be spent on paid work. I don't live on icons alone, I also need to eat. In the video description, you'll find the links to support me. Thank you. Now we transfer the podlinnik to our board. First the order doesn't matter too much. It's not a big deal. First, we measure where the center of the board is, so we know. The board is 25 centimeters wide, so where is the center? I'm sure you've all figured it out. 12.5 centimeters is the center of the board. We mark it the same way on the bottom edge. Try to mark it on the end so it's visible, not in the middle. You can set the board aside and, from our podlinnik, we make a tracing, so flip it over and use some pigment.
Deskę można sobie odłożyć i z naszego podlinnika robimy kalkę. Czyli odwracamy i używamy
Don't use black,
pigmentu.
pink, or red. This isn't about flashy colors. That's not the point. I usually use green umber or something in between brown tones.
Takiego pośredniego pomiędzy tam brązowym. Niektórzy używają też sieny palonej na przykład.
Some people also use burnt sienna, for example.
O to chodzi, żeby było
The
widać te
idea
linie,
is for the
ale
lines to
żeby
be
też one
visible,
nie stały
but not
się
so much that they can't be removed later.
częścią, której się potem nie da usunąć. Rozprowadzamy pigment.
We spread the pigment over the paper.
Sobie na
Tap off the excess.
papierze. Nadmiar strzepujemy.
Now we go to our board. Place the center of the podlinnik on the center of the board. Do the same at the bottom. So everything is positioned exactly in the center. And then we secure it in place. There are many methods, Some people use fancy
maksymalnie
ones, but
na
I just use
środku.
regular tape.
No i czymś przytwierdzamy. Sposoby są przeróżne, niektórzy tam używają jakichś...
Secure it so it doesn't
specjalnych,
shift,
ale
otherwise, it'll come
ja
out
po
crooked.
prostu to robię zwykłą taśmą. Łapiemy, żeby nam to nie uciekało.
Then we trace all the lines we need with a pen, so we have a kind
Długopisem
of sketch.
odrysowujemy wszystkie linie,
And that's the whole philosophy of making a
które
podlinnik.
mamy
Once finished, we'll remove it and we'll have a traced copy.
mieć, po to, żeby mieć
After making the
taki
podlinnik, that is,
szkic. I to
transferring
jest
all the
cała
parts,
filozofia robienia tego
we
podlinniku.
check
Po,
it carefully. Don't
zrobieniu
peel the whole thing off right away,
zdejmiemy i będziemy
because this
mieli
way, we can check if we've
odrysowaną
transferred
kartę.
everything. I
Po
believe we
wykonaniu
have.
podlinnika, czyli odbicia
So I remove it
wszystkich
completely.
części,
And now we
sprawdzamy
have
sobie,
two methods.
nie odrywamy od razu całości, nie, no bo możemy sobie w ten sposób też sprawdzić, czy wszystko odbiliśmy. No ja myślę, że tak. W związku z tym zdejmuję całościowo.
There are
Teraz
two
mamy
different schools
dwie
that teach
metody.
different ways
Dwie
of what to
szkoły
do next,
uczą,
to get something meaningful out of this,
bardzo różnie,
and
co
also
z tym
not to
dalej
lose the
zrobić,
podlinnik,
żeby
and not to lose all
z
the
tego
borders
coś
and layout.
ciekawego nam powstało, żeby nam się też nie zatracił podlinnik i też żeby nie zatracić tych wszystkich ramek i tego wszystkiego. I można tutaj
So we
przyjąć
can
dwie
choose
metody.
between two
Można
methods.
zrobić żłobienie
One is
za
engraving
pomocą
using
na
something like the
przykład,
tip of a compass.
końcówki cyrkla.
You carve out each line with a single
I
stroke of a sharp
wyżłobić
compass tip.
każdy jednym
Engrave
takim
each of those
przejechaniem
lines.
ostrego cyrkla, wyżłobić każdą taką linię. Ja
I'll try to
postaram
show
się
that a
troszkę
bit.
pokazać.
I demonstrated in
też to
other courses
pokazuje,
too.
więc
Basically, you press and
po
carve
prostu
the line.
przyciskamy i żłobimy linię. I wtedy
That
te linie
way,
nam się nie
the lines
zatracą.
don't get
Przy czym
lost.
to jest takie, wiecie, już
Although, honestly,
dziecięca forma
it's a bit of a childish tracing method.
kalkowania.
We can go a level higher and draw those
Możemy
lines with
wyjść na
paint.
wyższe poziomy i zrobić sobie te linie za pomocą farby. Przy czym najpierw
But
musimy
first,
tutaj
we
uwzględnić
need to
tą
mark
ramkę
the
dolną,
lower border,
która
in my
mnie
case,
wynosi 2
2
cm.
centimeters,
Ja bym chciał
so I know where
sobie
to end the
zaznaczyć, żeby
garments.
wiedzieć, dokąd zakończyć te szaty. W związku z tym ja to już robię.
So I'm doing that now. I measure 2
Mierzam
centimeters
sobie te
and
2 centymetry.
just mark where the line should be.
I zaznaczam po prostu, że to jest dotąd.
Friends, when you draw anything with pencil or other tools directly on the board, try not to make the lines thick, because they'll be hard to erase later.
Starajcie się nie robić takich grubych linii, bo to wtedy nie da się tego pozbyć potem. No i w tej chwili możemy to
And now we
zacząć,
can start marking.
zaznaczać. Ja używam
I just use tempera for
tego
this.
tempery po prostu.
You can learn how to make
Jak
tempera
zrobić
in
temperę,
earlier
to
courses,
możecie znaleźć
for
w kursach
example,
tych
the course
wcześniejszych,
in
na
IKON
przykład
course.
Korsuńska. Ja wam też podłączę
I'll also link a video on
jakby
how to
film,
prepare
jak to
this.
uzyskać. Ja
I
używam
usually use
tempery
tempera in a
zazwyczaj
1:3 or 1:5 ratio,
lub
where
1
one
do
part is egg yolk
5,
and 3 parts are
przy
either
czym
wine
jedna
vinegar
część
or
to jest
degassed
żółtko,
beer.
3 części albo wina, albo octu, albo octu, to znaczy się tutaj chodzi o ocet winny, octu winnego,
That
albo
is, we're talking about wine vinegar
odgazowanego
here,
piwa.
or degassed beer.
Do tego
We
żółtka
add this to
dolewamy
the egg
i
yolk.
czasami niektórzy
Some
używają
people
takich
also
2
add 2
części
parts
wody,
of distilled
jeszcze
water.
dolewają destylowanej.
But I don't
Szczególnie
like
lubię
adding
dolewać
water,
wodę, dlatego
because
że
it lightens the
wtedy
pigment,
jaśnieje
and I
i
find
jest
it
to
unpleasant to
takie
paint
nieciekawe
with.
dla mnie.
It's hard for me to
Ciężko mi
paint
się
the
maluje.
lines that way.
Przy robieniu właśnie tych linii można użyć kolorów różnych, ale nie używać czarnego na
You
przykład.
can use different
To nie o to
colors,
chodzi, żeby
but
te
don't
linie
use
były
black,
takie super
for example.
wyraźne. One
It's
nam nie
not about making
zaginą.
the lines overly sharp. They won't get
Bierzemy po prostu
lost.
bardzo rzadką tą
We
temperę.
just take a very diluted tempera paint.
Ja tu na przykład
For
używam
example,
umbry
I use
zielonej
green umber.
do szat i do zaznaczenia wszystkich innych rzeczy, a na twarzy do zaznaczenia sieny palonej albo
For garments and to
jakiegoś
outline
brązu
other
takiego
elements, and for
wymieszanego
the
z
face I
czerwienią,
use burnt
żeby
sienna
to nie
or a
były
brown
takie
mixed with
super
red,
ciemne
so it's
kolory,
not too dark but rather as light as
w miarę
possible.
możliwości.
I use green here
Tutaj
because the
używam zielonego,
robe is
dlatego, że
generally
szata
greenish,
ogólnie jest
and we
taka
simply
zielonkawa.
redraw those
I
lines
po
using the
prostu
paint.
odtwarzamy te linie za pomocą farby. I dzięki temu, że to zrobimy, chodzi tylko o to, żeby
And by
odtworzyć
doing
te
that,
linie.
we're simply
Nie
restoring
tutaj
those
od razu
lines.
nie wiadomo
We're
jakich
not
cudów,
painting anything
tylko
spectacular
odtwarzamy
here
sobie
right
te
away.
linie. Po co?
We're just
Po to, żeby
redrawing the
one
lines.
po prostu nam się nie starły
Why?
podczas jakichś innych
So
czynności.
that they don't get rubbed off during other
I
steps.
lekko
While
je
we're
po
working.
prostu zwyczajnie
And we simply lightly retrace
wszystkie
all of them.
odtwarzamy.
All
Możemy
of them.
wyżłobić, możemy
We
odtworzyć.
can carve
Na
them
twarzy
in or
robimy
redraw them with paint.
sobie na przykład ten czerwony
On the
kolor.
face, for
Ja
example,
to też
we
tłumaczę
use a
w
red
kursie
pigment.
z
I also explain this in the course with the pneumatophora.
pneumatoforą. Te linie nam się
These
jakby nie
lines
zamalują
won't get
potem
covered up
przy
later when we
malowaniu.
paint, but we use them to mark
Po
where
prostu
things
sobie
are.
zaznaczamy, gdzie te
We
rzeczy
can
są.
also refine their
Wtedy
shapes a
możemy
bit
ładnie
because when using a
wyprofilować
ruler,
już,
everything
dlatego,
tends
że
to get distorted a
przy
little.
robieniu podlinnika nam się
Things
to
shift
wszystko
a bit,
psuje
and it
trochę
ends up
i
looking sloppy.
gdzieś tam długopis
Remember
jedzie i
to
to nieładnie
outline only
wygląda.
this side of the nose.
Pamiętamy, że nos tylko z tej strony zaznaczamy. Widzicie, ja na przykład zauważyłem, że tam w przykładzie jest
I
bardzo
noticed,
nisko
for
ten
example, that in the example
motylek
image,
nosa
the
tutaj, to
nostril
ten
on
bok,
this side is placed
tam
way
jest
too
bardzo
low.
obniżony, to jest nieprawidłowo.
It's incorrectly
dlatego
positioned,
ja
so I
osobiście
personally moved
podwyżyłem
it a bit
troszeczkę
higher.
I to już możecie też
You can
sobie tam
adjust that too.
zrobić. I zaznaczamy sobie liniami te wszystkie
And we go ahead and
części,
mark
które
with lines all the parts we
I robimy to
need,
tylko po
and
to,
we only
żeby
do
po
this
prostu
so
nam
that
przy
things don't
innych
get
czynnościach
erased
się
while we
nie
work
stanie.
on other parts.
Także pracujemy,
That's all.
odtwarzamy to i
So we
potem
work,
przechodzimy
we
do
trace,
kolejnej
and then we move on to the next
części
phase of work.
pracy. Mam nadzieję,
I
że
hope
wszystko
I covered
powiedziałem.
everything.
Chyba
I think
tak.
I did.
Ja sobie zaznaczyłem tą też kropkę, gdzie jest nimbus, żeby to zapamiętać sobie, że tutaj jest
I
ta
also
kropka.
marked this dot for the
Ale nie
halo,
róbcie dziury
just to
tam
remember
takiej
where it is,
nadzwyczajnej, bo
but
to
don't
też
make a
potem trudno
huge
się
hole
tych
there
wszystkich
because it's
rzeczy
hard to get rid of later.
No i ja już wykonałem, jak widzicie, te wszystkie linie.
And now I've completed,
Zobaczcie taką
as you can
rzecz, że
see,
ja namalowałem
all the
tego
lines.
żelca, na przykład,
Take a
ani
look
tych
at
wszystkich
this.
takich
I didn't
szczegółów,
paint the
ani
rosary,
krowianka nie
for example,
zaznaczałem,
nor did I
kroku.
mark all those
Dlatego
details,
takie
or
rzeczy
the
robię,
floral
ponieważ
crown
one
around her head.
potem bardzo
Why
przeszkadzają
do I
w
skip
dokończeniu
those things?
szczegółów szaty. To są
Because
takie
they
rzeczy,
interfere a lot
które
with
wychodzą
finishing the
do przodu,
details of the garments.
potem dlatego ich się nie robi
Those
od
are
razu.
elements that come to the
Przynajmniej ja tak
foreground
uważam,
later,
żeby ich,
so I don't do them at
na
the
tyle
start.
nie robić. No i tutaj nam się w tej chwili
At least, that's my opinion. It's better to leave them out at this stage.
nasze drogi się
Now,
rozejdą
at
w
this point,
znaczeniu.
after
Nie, że
completing
kończy się
and
kurs,
transferring the
tylko
underdrawing,
nasze
our
drogi się
paths will
rozejdą na
diverge.
interpretację
Not that the course is
współczesną i
ending, but will now split into two
taką
approaches. So from here,
tradycyjną.
after the
W
underdrawing
związku
is
z tym
transferred,
będziemy
our paths will
teraz
branch
już
off. I
będę
mean not
ciągnął
that the
dwa
course is
jakby
over, but
warsztaty
will separate into a
i
contemporary
pokazywał,
interpretation and a
także ci, którzy
traditional
chcą
one.
zdecydować, że
So
chcą
from
iść
now
trochę
on
ze
I'll be running
współczesną,
two
mogą
parallel
pójść
workshops.
tą drogą. Ci, którzy chcą
Those who
zdecydować,
want to
że chcą
follow
iść
the
tradycyjną,
contemporary
mogą
interpretation can
pójść
go
drogą
that route, and
tradycyjną.
those who
To
want to do the
dwa
traditional
różne
one can follow
jakby,
that.
kursy.
These will be two different paths in the
No to
course.
co? Idziemy
So, let's
dalej.
keep going. Do you like this format of a video icon painting workshop? Please remember that I'm sharing with you over 20 years of experience. I don't have to do this for free, and I don't have to teach anyone. I know how to do this myself and can work on my own. I'll be grateful if you show appreciation for the effort I put into recording these videos with a donation to the foundation, so I can keep doing more. The time I spend creating this workshop could otherwise be used for paid work. I don't live on icons alone, I also need to eat. In the video description, you'll find links to support me. Thank you. Now we'll try to move on to the contemporary interpretation of this icon. There won't be gilding, nor will it be a completely traditional approach. We've already transferred the underdrawing, and that's the foundation of our work. Before I start, I'd like to mark something. Just a brief point, I don't know where I put my compass.
Jakiś szerszy wykład, tylko nie wiem, gdzie mam cyrkiel tu.
I'd like to mark the halo. We know the halo should have the size of the nose, right? So let's roughly mark it like that, so we get an idea of its size. Try not to make a hole in the icon, although I do that sometimes. And then I leave it.
Ja robię czasami i potem zostawiam, ale...
Okay, the halo is marked. I knew I'd work badly without a halo. What are we aiming for in this interpretation? What are we seeking? Are we looking for something radically new? Because some people associate contemporary interpretation solely with Nowosilski. But that's not the point. It's not about Nowosilski, it's about Rublow. You've probably seen such interpretations online already, or close-ups of Rublow or reproductions. And what's so amazing, some of this may be the result of conservation work, although not entirely, because conservation would have had to erase those very light colors, and they weren't retouched. So it's likely that Rublow really painted in a very, very delicate manner, with visible gesso underneath. Notice how different color palettes appear here. Usually everything is painted green, but here we already see a blue underpainting appearing, light blue, even. What are we aiming for? We're aiming to find a way to paint the icon lightly. To create a light background, a light robe, one that's just suggested, in order to bring out a spiritual atmosphere that emerges through it.
Zrobienie lekkiego tła, zrobienie lekkiej szaty, która jest tylko zaznaczona, dążenie do takiej duchowej atmosfery, która się pojawi dzięki temu. Tutaj to można zauważyć we zbliżeniach.
You can notice this in the close-ups of Rublow. Look at this test, a very close look at the robe. We have a main color that is applied very lightly. It's almost invisible and only in some areas there is fairly strong shading.
Jest wręcz prawie że niewidoczny i tylko w niektórych miejscach jest zacieniony dosyć mocno i to w szczególności w miejscach, w których będzie potem
especially in areas that will later be brightened with a completely different color, which is also something worth noticing. Notice how the underpainting here is burnt sienna, essentially red, but the shading is done using white mixed with blue, which is a completely opposite shading method.
Jest robione bielą wymieszaną z błękitem, co jest zupełnie przeciwną formą cieniowania. I tutaj chodzi
And what I want to do in this contemporary interpretation is to show that you can play with color schemes.
Że można bawić się kolorystyką. Dlaczego możemy się bawić kolorystyką?
Why can we play with color in an icon? Because we're supposed to gaze into the light of Mount Tabor, and light refracted through a prism gives us a multitude of colors, different overlays of color. And in this course, it's worth beginning to observe how light splits through a prism, what it looks like. The so-called color wheel, but a detailed one, which colors are complementary.
Tak zwane koło kolorów, ale takie bardzo szczegółowe, które kolory są sobie przeciwne. Zobaczcie, że tutaj Rublow również używa.
Look here, Rublow also uses, right? This is probably burnt sienna mixed with some ochre. And the shadows are made with blue paint, a light blue mixed somewhere with white.
Niebieskim kolorem, błękitem wymieszanym gdzieś tam z bielą. I to jest to właśnie, że tworzymy pewną taką duchową
And this is exactly it. We are creating a certain spiritual form. It's worth searching online, or I will try to publish some extra files, showing how this is all painted.
Zobaczcie, że ten cień, tam gdzie powinno być zaciemnienie, to tam jest dużo tej farby.
Look how the shadow, where there should be shading, has a lot of pigment, and here the pigment fades away. It practically disappears. And it's not really because of conservation as such, because that's where the layer was removed. But this here isn't due to conservation. Here we can see what conservation did, there's a hole. But the rest, that's Rublow's painting style. And it's worth taking a close look, because this is what we'll try to aim for in this so-called contemporary interpretation. It's not about a fully modern reinterpretation, but more about capturing this approach. Here we can see a green, a greenish, even olive tone. This is our color. This is the tone we should aim for the robe of Our Lady of Fatima. And here it's brought out with a hint of blue. Maybe you can't see it on camera. And then there's a very bright highlight. The edges are fairly sharp, here even in black, although I'll say it's not black, but rather a deep brown. Here we have a very strong close-up. See how that blue is laid on top of burnt sienna. A completely different approach.
inna forma. Nam się cienie jakby szat kojarzą z czymś takim, co byśmy nazwali, no, że jeżeli coś jest niebieskie, to musi być jasno niebieskie.
We often associate the shading of garments with the idea that if something is blue, it must be light blue, right? And this is how we create shadow. Here the colors are complementary. You can also see on the hands that all this shading is done very lightly. This leg is damaged, so it might not be clearly visible.
Zobaczcie, że również tutaj sankir
I'd also like to show the face.
położony tak,
The faces.
że widać lewkas.
Look, here too the sanker, base tone, is applied so thinly that you can see the gesso, levkas. The sanker isn't damaged or washed away by conservation, the levkas is just visible. And the shadows on the face are done very delicately. There's practically no pigment here, it's just egg, slightly tinted, which gives us the effect of that spiritual atmosphere, as if they were emerging from mist or some sort of shadow. And that's what I'd like to aim for in this work on the Fatima icon in the second course. That's what we'll try to do here.
Tutaj będziemy próbowali poszukiwać. Zobaczcie, że oczy.
Notice that the eyes, as many iconographers do, have very sharp edges, classic Greek style elements. But the rest is very soft, delicate. Also notice that the eyes are not filled in with a different color than the rest.
I też zobaczcie, że oczu nie wypełnia się innym kolorem niż jest reszta wypełniona. Zakończenia są bardzo ładnie.
The outlines are nicely painted with a brown or burnt sienna tone. With brown, all the details that we usually paint in icons are present, but they are done with taste, so that everything gains that kind of spiritual atmosphere.
Po to, żeby nabrało to wszystko takiej duchowej atmosfery. Dobra, ja nie będę dalej gadał, tylko
Alright, I won't keep talking, we'll just try to pursue this. We'll try to get there. Look at the hair again. We see once more that the sanker, or base tone, doesn't fully cover the gesso. You can still see the levkas through it. So how do we start working?
Jak będziemy pracować? Pierwszą rzeczą, którą musimy wykonać, to
the first thing we need to do is dull the levkas, to make sure it's not too absorbent.
Taki chłonny za bardzo i to taka prosta sprawa, że po prostu
it's a simple step. We just need to saturate the icon with tempera. I'm deliberately not doing any gilding now. I'm just going to show how this process works. Something's going on with the camera and I don't know if it will cut off or not. We'll see in a moment. Do you like this kind of video format for icon painting workshops? Please remember that I'm sharing over 20 years of my experience with you. I don't have to do this for free, and I don't have to teach anyone. I can just work for myself. It would be great if you confirm the value of my efforts to create these videos with a donation to the foundation, so I can keep going. The time spent making this workshop, after all, I could spend working for myself. I don't live on icons alone, I need to eat too. In the video description, you'll find links to support me. Thank you.